Have you ever noticed how the biggest moments on live television are almost never the ones anyone planned? The interviews producers spend days preparing for rarely become the stories people remember. Insta. D. It's the unexpected moments, the split-second decisions, the uncomfortable silence, the conversations that suddenly go off script that end up dominating headlines for days. That's exactly why one appearance involving country music superstar Blake Shelton continues to spark debate whenever people talk about celebrities, live television, and the pressure that comes with having millions of people watching every word. What was supposed to be a routine stop to promote new music reportedly took a dramatic turn, transforming a relaxed conversation into an increasingly uncomfortable exchange that left everyone in the studio scrambling to keep control. Whether you believe celebrities should speak openly about social and political issues or believe entertainers should imply entertain, one thing is certain: few situations revealed those differences more clearly in a live television interview where nobody has the luxury of pressing pause, and by the time everything was over, viewers weren't talking about the album anymore. They were talking about the argument. Before we get into everything that reportedly unfolded, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you were invited onto national talk show to discuss your latest project, would you expect difficult political questions? Or would you expect the conversation to stay focused on why you were there in the first place? Blake Shelton has spent decades building an image that's remarkably consistent. He's known for his laid-back personality, quick sense of humor, and ability to laugh at himself. Whether performing in sold-out arenas, coaching hopeful singers on television, or joking with fellow celebrities, he has generally avoided turning himself into a political figure. His fans know him primarily as a country artist who tells stories through music rather than headlines. That reputation has served him well, unlike many public figures who regularly comment on controversial issues. Shelton has often preferred letting his work speak for itself. So, when he reportedly arrived at the studio that morning, everything appeared perfectly normal. The atmosphere was friendly, the audience was excited, the cameras rolled. The conversation began exactly the way viewers have seen thousands of celebrity interviews begin. Over the years, the hosts welcomed him warmly. Questions centered around his newest music, the creative process behind the album, and how his sound had evolved over the years. Shelton appeared relaxed, he smiled easily, joked with the panel, and answered questions with the same easygoing personality audiences have come to expect. Stories about recording sessions mixed naturally with memories from his years mentoring singers on television. The audience laughed. The panel laughed. Everything felt comfortable. Even people watching from home probably assumed they knew exactly where the interview was headed. A few stories, a few jokes. A quick promotion. Then everyone moves on. That's the formula, and for a while, it seemed to be working perfectly. One of the things that has always made Blake Shelton successful in interviews is that he rarely appears rushed. He answers thoughtfully. He doesn't seem interested in creating viral moments. Instead, he usually focuses on making people comfortable. That relaxed energy often encourages hosts to open up, making conversations feel less like interviews and more like friends catching up. It was exactly that atmosphere that seemed to settle over the studio during the opening portion of the conversation. Fans watching likely felt reassured. This was the Blake Shelton they expected. Confident, funny, comfortable in his own skin. But live television has a way of changing direction without warning. Sometimes all it takes is one question. Not because the question itself is necessarily explosive, but because of what follows. As the conversation gradually shifted away from music, one topic reportedly began moving closer to the center of the discussion: current events, public responsibility, the role of celebrities in modern society. These subjects have become increasingly common on daytime television. Many interviewers believe public figures have a unique opportunity to influence conversations far beyond entertainment. Others believe celebrities shouldn't be expected to become political commentators simply because they're famous. Those competing expectations have fueled countless debates over the past several years, and according to the circulating account, that larger debate suddenly landed directly in Blake Shelton's lap. At first, the transition appeared subtle. A question was introduced that moved beyond music and into broader issues facing the country. Nothing unusual there. Talk shows frequently expand conversations beyond the project a guest is promoting. Shelton reportedly answered carefully, rather than diving into political opinions. He explained that he generally preferred keeping his music separate from political conversations. It wasn't an angry response. It wasn't dismissive. It appeared to be an attempt to steer the interview back toward the reason he believed he had accepted the invitation in the first place. For many guests, that's a common strategy. Redirect politely. Avoid unnecessary controversy. Continue discussing the work you're there to promote, but not every interviewer views that approach the same way. Sometimes declining to engage becomes part of the conversation itself. Instead of ending the subject, it can actually make the questions more persistent, according to the story. That's exactly what began happening. The discussion slowly stopped being about music. It slowly stopped being about touring. It slowly stopped being about entertainment altogether. Instead, the focus reportedly shifted toward whether celebrities have a responsibility to publicly express their views on major national issues. The atmosphere inside the studio reportedly changed almost immediately. Moments earlier, the audience had been laughing. Now they were listening more carefully. The easy rhythm that had defined the interview began slowing down. Even small pauses started carrying extra weight. Body language often says more than words during live television. A smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, a glance toward another host, a brief silence before answering. Those tiny moments can completely change how viewers interpret what's happening. According to the transcript, Shelton appeared increasingly cautious with each response, choosing his words carefully while attempting to avoid turning the interview into a political debate. The challenge, of course, is that once two people have different expectations for a conversation, every answer starts pulling them farther apart. One person wants discussion, the other wants redirection. One believes avoiding politics is itself a statement. The other believes refusing to engage is simply staying focused on the original purpose of the interview. Neither side necessarily sees themselves as creating conflict, yet conflict begins growing anyway. And by this point, the audience could reportedly sense that something had fundamentally changed. The relaxed promotional interview they had been watching only minutes earlier no longer felt routine. It felt unpredictable. And everyone in the studio seemed to realize they were approaching a moment where the conversation could either calm down. The change wasn't dramatic at first. There was no shouting. No one stood up. No one interrupted the other mid-sentence. Instead, the conversation reportedly became something much more uncomfortable. Each question seemed to carry a little more weight than the one before it. Each answer became a little more measured, and every attempt to move back toward music only seemed to pull the discussion further away from it. According to the account, Blake Shelton calmly explained that people came to his concerts for an escape. After long workdays, after stressful weeks, after dealing with everyday life, fans weren't buying tickets because they wanted another political speech. They were coming for songs that reminded them of home, family, heartbreak, hope, and celebration. For him, that was enough. It was a perspective many entertainers have expressed over the years. Not because they don't have opinions, but because they believe their profession serves a different purpose. Music has always been one of the few places where people with completely different beliefs can stand beside each other and sing the same lyrics. Shelton reportedly suggested that preserving that space mattered to him. But according to the transcript, the conversation didn't move back toward entertainment. Instead, the questions became more direct. If someone has millions of followers, if their voice carries enormous influence, do they also carry a responsibility to speak publicly on issues affecting society? It's a question that has divided audiences for years. Some argue silence itself communicates a message. Others believe demanding public statements from entertainers places expectations on them that were never part of the job. Neither position is new. But discussing it live with cameras rolling and millions potentially watching is very different from debating it online. Shelton reportedly remained composed. He emphasized that everyone was entitled to personal opinions. He respected differing viewpoints. But he had come to discuss music rather than participate in a political debate. For a brief moment, it seemed as though that might settle things. Instead, according to the circulating story, the questions became even more pointed. The discussion shifted away from whether celebrities could speak out. Now it centered on whether they should. The distinction mattered. One suggests freedom. The other suggests obligation. As that difference became clearer, viewers reportedly noticed changes throughout the studio. Several hosts appeared increasingly cautious. The audience had grown remarkably quiet. Even the usual reactions, laughter, applause, casual interruptions had almost disappeared. Everyone seemed to understand they were witnessing something far different from a standard celebrity interview. Shelton reportedly sat forward slightly. His relaxed posture became noticeably firmer. He continued answering respectfully, but there was now an unmistakable seriousness in his tone. When you're repeatedly asked variations of the same question, eventually the conversation stops feeling like curiosity. It starts feeling like pressure. Whether that pressure is intentional or not often depends on who's watching. Supporters of tough interviews might argue that public figures should expect difficult questions. Others might say guests deserve to discuss the project they were invited to promote. That's what made the reported exchange so compelling. It wasn't simply about politics. It was about expectations. What does a talk show owe its guest? And what does a guest owe the audience? According to the transcript, Shelton argued that his responsibility was to create music that connected people rather than divide them. He suggested that bringing audiences together through entertainment was meaningful in its own right. The response was calm, measured, but it didn't appear to end the disagreement. Instead, the discussion reportedly became more personal. Comments about privilege, influence, responsibility. The words themselves weren't necessarily new, but the way they were exchanged reportedly changed the atmosphere dramatically. At this stage, the conversation no longer resembled an interview. It resembled two fundamentally different philosophies colliding in real time. One perspective held that public influence creates public responsibility. The other maintained that influence does not erase personal choice. Neither side appeared willing to abandon its position. And with every passing minute, those positions seemed to move farther apart. According to the transcript, other panel members reportedly attempted to ease the tension. There were efforts to redirect, suggestions to slow the conversation down, attempts to restore a more conversational tone. But once emotions begin shaping an exchange, steering it back becomes increasingly difficult. Shelton reportedly began challenging the assumptions being made about him. He questioned whether people could truly understand another person's values simply because they chose not to discuss politics publicly. He argued that much of what people do happens away from cameras. Private generosity, personal relationships, community involvement. Those things rarely become headlines, yet they may say more about someone's character than any televised statement ever could. It's an argument that resonated with many viewers after the story spread. Can someone's values only be measured by what they say publicly, or should actions away from the spotlight matter just as much? According to the account, the discussion continued growing more intense as both sides defended their positions without finding common ground. By now, the smiles from earlier in the interview had completely disappeared. Every answer carried visible frustration. Every follow-up question seemed to deepen the divide. And although nobody in the studio could know exactly how the conversation would end, it was becoming increasingly clear that this interview was no longer about promoting an album. It had become something much bigger, something neither side seemed willing to walk away from. At least, not yet.